we're going to talk about housing and homelessness in Marin County, and just put 4 young people there because I think that housing has been like largely an issue controlled by like adults, and it's like really technical and hard to understand. And like my goal with this is to like get a bunch of young people who might like want to learn a lot about housing, and you might know a lot already, but to get more young people involved in this. My name's Ethan. I'm from San Rafael, and I just think that like at my core, that like this is an issue that affects all of us in Marin and affects adults in Marin and young people. But only adults really have been in the rooms where things are going on. So that's kind of my lens for doing this and partnering with MAC. And there'll be, just go over the agenda real quick. First, talk about why housing matters in Marin. Then we'll go over like how we got here, like why is Marin so expensive? Why is Marin so segregated? And then we'll talk about some housing solutions. That section will be kind of brief, and I wish it was longer. But then Andrew will talk some about homelessness, which definitely related to housing, also its own issue. And that I'm really excited to learn more from Andrew. And then we'll talk a bit about advocating for housing and how you can get involved. Like Emma mentioned, there's a huge hearing at the Board of Supervisors tomorrow and next Tuesday. If you can't attend, you can always write a letter. So this is definitely oriented around like being able to take that specific action and also other stuff in the future as well. So feel free to like introduce yourself in the chat, like maybe your name and just like your relationship to Marin. So if you're with an organization, if you're a student or just a concerned citizen or whatever along those lines, be cool to see who's in the room. And added bonus thing, if you want to add, type in the chat with that introduction, like how does the design of Marin like reflect our county's values? That's like a big question, I know. But if you have thoughts on like how the way our county is designed impacts the social dynamic of our county, I think we all have lived here probably for some amount of time and driven around or walked around Marin and see the homes and the way that our county looks. And I just put some photos here to jog your memory maybe. I can go ahead and get started if people don't have thoughts. I think like Marin, classic to Marin is the single family home, like your lawn, your car, your parents in the house with kids. And I think that kind of shows Marin's value of being a like family oriented place. Like this isn't a place necessarily as much with so many single family homes for a bunch of 20-something-year-olds to be single and like have fun and figure out their life. I think we have a lot of single family homes in Marin, and that shows what we value. We also have open space in Marin. We have like 80% open space or something like that. And in Marin, we definitely care about having space for an environmental reason and for like recreational and social reasons. With the bottom left picture there, thinking about homes being super expensive. And I think that shows the large homes that we have in Marin, values of wealth. Like people in Marin value wealth a lot. And I think this is just all to say, like we're going to be talking about these physical features of Marin. We're going to be talking about a lot of other stuff, but I think I'm trying to make that connection between physical design and then these values that we have and the systems that we have to design our county physically really impact people. So thanks everyone for indulging me on that. And next, I just want to talk about race in housing. I think a lot of y'all probably are focused on being anti-racist, and you might kind of come into this with the knowledge that in the past in Marin we've had redlining, meaning that in Marin in the past it was a lot easier for a white person to be able to afford a home and buy a home and then start amassing wealth when that home started increasing in price than for people of color to do that. Or that was also done through racial covenants. So that meant that a neighborhood could create a racial covenant that meant only white people can move into those neighborhoods. Like back in the day, I think they kind of said only people of the Caucasian race. So there's redlining and racial covenants, which in the past were legal. They were legal and pretty racially explicit ways to exclude people of color from living in our county. And those are illegal now in their blatant racialized form. But there are still ways that we in Marin super effectively, but more subtly, not with that blatant racist language, exclude people of color and low-income people from being able to live in our county. And I think, like, while the past is super important, I really want to focus on those current things that are continuing to be exclusive in our county. So a lot of it comes down to the fact that Marin is just super expensive. This is the price of Marin homes over since the 1990s, and homes have increased from a median home price of about like 400,000 to like 1,500,000. So it's super expensive to buy a home here. Most of our homes are owned single family homes. So it's that, in a sense, just dictates who gets to live here. But then also for people who rent, in Marin, you need to earn $52.31 an hour to afford a 1-bedroom apartment that is on the market, that's fair market rent. And that was from a national low income housing, I think, coalition study that was trying to take into account like wages versus the price of housing. And when we have a minimum wage of $15, a lot of people are not going to be able to afford this $52 an hour housing that we have here in Marin. So Marin is super expensive, as we know. And that is important because if, say, you come into this focusing on education or just generally on social justice, or you like to think a lot about like health disparities in Marin, all of these issues are, of course, connected. And I think it's impossible to think about something like food security without thinking about where people live, and as a result of where they live, where their school gets money for school lunches or something like that. So housing is connected with all these other issues. And the high prices that we have here in Marin affect both like the social landscape of Marin, so who can live here and those inequities, and the physical landscape of Marin, what our county looks like. And I'm just going to talk a bit more about that and why housing matters. And then we'll get into like how we got here, why prices are super expensive. So Marin is racially segregated. These are census tracts based on like with all the yellow ones with our more than 85% white census tracts. And then that's like most of the county, to be honest. And then you can see this red census tract here is mostly Latinx in the canal. So Marin, where people live is definitely dictated by race in Marin. And I remember when I learned like in high school about segregation, it was definitely this thing like of the South, of the past. And first of all, I think it would be great if we taught in our schools here in Marin what our county actually looks like. But that is another story. But then we also, based on geography, have geographic inequities. So not only is our county segregated by race, but if you look at a census tract like Mill Valley versus a place in Novato, they have extremely different human development indexes. And what does human development index measures? It measures like a long and healthy life, access to education, and a decent standard of living. So this is kind of your most holistic view of like people and how people are living. And not only are we segregated by race, like in the last slide, but you can measure these differences in the holistic success, let's say, of communities. And a lot of this comes down to the fact that housing costs, the prices that we have here in Marin, disproportionately affect people of color. So this graph shows your income left after housing costs for renters. So you spend all the money that you spend to be able to live in your home, and this is how much money you have left. And white people in Marin, that's $60,000, where for Latinx or people of other races, there was no, like, this is the data that was available, so it didn't specify more like racial categories, but that's a lot less. And white people have like almost 4 times the amount of money that people of other races have after housing costs. And then another thing, just because this is like housing for like young people in Marin, is that like we talked about earlier, Marin is kind of has that single home family value thing to it, and that is based on its housing. And you can see that again here with the fact that like the majority of Marin's population, like more people live here who are in their 50s and 40s and 60s, and like a surprising percentage of people in their 70s as well, compared to young people. And that's because like young people are generally less wealthy. And so if you're a person who grows up in Marin and like want to continue to live here, that's going to be a lot harder because you have to be a pretty wealthy 20 through 29-year-old. And to me, that's just like, what does that say about our community here in Marin? That it's really hard to like come back here and live here unless you work this job that makes you a lot of money. And then high prices also affect the physical landscape of Marin. We talked a bit about social issues in Marin, and starting with transportation. So 68,000 people commute into Marin to work every day, which to me is pretty mind-boggling. That's a lot of people coming into Marin for a 200,000 person county. And 16,000 of those people travel 100 or more miles a day in their commute to get here. And it's not because people want to live far away. A majority of those workers who commute in from outside of Marin earn less than $40,000 a year. So it's truly because people can't afford to live here that so many people have to be driving through Sonoma and driving across the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge to get to Marin to work and then drive all the way back. And I think like from the perspective of like someone who lives in Marin, you don't really like see this huge issue of people having to live these weird double lives in working in Marin and then driving for an hour or 2 or 3 back to where they live. And I think from the perspective of someone who lives in Marin, like it embodies itself in like super increased traffic on the 101 or on the bridge or something like that. But people aren't able to live here, and I think that has a big impact on their lives and having to like get back home to your kids and stuff like that. I don't think there's like great research on this that I've seen. If you know something, let me know. But I think that is a huge deal, and it would be good if people who worked in our county could live in our county. And then also from an environmental perspective, generally sprawl is bad for the environment. Having lots of homes with lots of space means that you take up a lot more space. So this is like the carbon footprint of per household of these communities. And you can see a place like San Francisco, a place like Oakland or Berkeley is a lot more carbon efficient than than Marin or suburbs in general. And a lot of that is because there's a lot of things that contribute to our carbon footprint, but like 8 tons per household of fuel, which relatively kind of adds up to all of the food you eat, or to, let's see, what is this? Home appliances and clothing and whatnot. So like driving around Marin, as we all know, puts a lot of carbon in the atmosphere. So housing matters to me, and because it is what prevents us from creating an equitable and sustainable community in our county. I think there's a lot of stuff, but for me, it's about the environment and about equity in our county. So I'm gonna pivot a bit from like why this matters to how we got here, why are prices so high in Marin. And that is a combination of these regional factors that are outside of our control as Marin young people, and then also local issues that I think we have the power to change here in Marin. So how did we get here? Marin isn't alone in having super high prices. The whole Bay Area is super expensive. I think that's something that gets thrown around a lot. Everyone knows like Bay Area is super expensive. These are like the median values of homes across the Bay Area. And when you get into the Central Valley, prices go way down. And California is not alone either. California has 91 of, maybe that's 125 or so of the most expensive zip codes. So California is super expensive. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that California's population is growing very rapidly. Like it's adding one whole San Jose every 2 years, and like a whole Los Angeles every 8 years. California, lots of people want to move here. Like we have a lot of jobs, super beautiful. California is growing. And as a result, a lot of people want to live in homes in California. And I don't know if folks have taken like intro to microeconomics or something like that, but this is what they show you on the first day. And you have your supply of homes, and then you have your demand for homes. So all the people who want to, or moving to California, want to live in the Bay Area are your demand. And those affect the price, like supply and demand affects the price of homes in Marin. And when more people want to move into Marin or into the Bay Area, the blue line shifts to the right and the demand for housing goes up. And that could be counteracted, say, if the supply moved right, then prices would stay more the same. But what's been happening in the Bay Area as a whole, in Marin, but I think usually people think about this on a regional level because you can drive from one place to another. So this is a regional issue rather than just Marin. And what's been happening in the Bay Area is that the red line hasn't been growing to meet the blue line. And prices are super high. We've been underbuilding houses in the Bay Area. And you can see that in the fact that like there's tons of sprawl in like the middle of California. A lot of these people would live in the Bay Area if they could, but they can't. So we have to expand way horizontally rather than accommodating them in Marin or in San Francisco. And I just want to play this quick video because I think that like concept of supply and demand is like shaky, and I never liked economics. So this is just a quick video that explains it in a different way.
Ever wonder why rent is so high? Or why home prices seem to keep rising out of reach? Why is that? One reason is we don't have enough places to live. Remember musical chairs? When we were kids, you had to be fast. But in the housing market, instead of being fast, you just need to be rich. Here's how it works. Imagine there are 2 houses and 3 families playing. The music stops, and everybody scrambles for a home. The wealthy family gets the big house, The middle-class family gets one too. But there's no house left for the last family. What if the neighborhood added a new house? Let's make it a fancy one. The wealthy family says, "Hey, cool," and moves in. The middle-class family decides to spread out, and the family with the least money finds a home in their neighborhood. Nobody is out of the game, or out of a home.
Oh, yeah.
What if we played the same game citywide? You see, our city is really a huge game of musical chairs, and we're all playing. When there aren't enough homes for the people who live and work here, everybody has to compete for what's available, and the rents go up and up until people are priced out of the city and have to drive farther and farther to get to work. To fix it, we need more homes. Let's see what happens if we add more cottages and condos. Let's swap these old warehouses for something more comfortable. How about a mother-in-law apartment? What if our communities add enough homes of all shapes and sizes for all our neighbors? Ah, that's better. More homes means more of us can stay and thrive in the city we love. And that's great. Want to do more? Visit sightline.org/more.
Awesome. So it's kind of cheesy at the end, but I think the idea of having shows how, I think this shows how a huge system like the market works in a simpler way. And Eric wrote in the chat, I think, a pretty good question, which is, aren't there already a ton of potential homes being held for profit by speculators? Or is that less of a thing in Marin? And I think like there's definitely, I think people like approach the housing like world generally in a lot of different ways. And there definitely are some homes and there's definitely some speculators who are looking to buy them and hold them for a while and then sell them when the market is high. And that's definitely an issue. But I think what we're talking about is like 60,000, 70,000 people needing homes in Marin. And I think that making sure that speculators can't do that and that homes can be for people is super important, but isn't going to solve that root cause of this issue, which is that there's not enough affordable homes in Marin. And increasing the supply is one way of making Marin and generally the Bay Area more affordable. And we'll talk about some others. So like, where do those people who don't get the chair in Marin or don't get to live in a home in Marin live? They might live super far away, like we talked about, moving as far as like Stockton or Tracy. I used to go to like soccer tournaments in like Stockton and Tracy, and it was super far drive, and some people do that every day. And so that's just population density change between 2000 and 2014. And or if they don't want to do that huge commute in Marin, they make it work in Marin. And to make it work in Marin sometimes has a lot of problems. You might have to fit a lot more people than should be in your home, in that home, or you have to pay more money than you think you should. Housing cost burden refers to when you pay more than 30% of your income on housing. Then you don't have enough money for a lot of other essential stuff. So 23% of households in Marin have at least one of those 4 housing problems. And that's from people just trying to make it work with the high prices we have in Marin. Or they don't live in a home. And Andrew's going to talk to us a bit more specifically about homelessness, which is a big issue in Marin. I just don't know a whole lot about it. So why hasn't Marin built more housing, like to accommodate its workforce, to like increase the supply of housing in the Bay Area? There's a lot of reasons like why Marin could build more housing, and we really haven't. So first, going to talk about housing being difficult to build. We have a lot of like policies and regulations in Marin that make it difficult to build housing. And then we also have blocked housing, affordable housing, or middle income housing, or all these different types of housing when it's been proposed. So why hasn't Marin built more housing? And first, I want to talk about zoning. And zoning basically says like where you can build what types of things. So you have your, like this is like Mill Valley and Tiburon and Corte Madera and whatnot. And you have your commercial zoning, which are the malls we have in Marin. And a lot of this though is like residential zoning, which means that it's for homes. And if you look closer at the key on the left and at all of these like numbers here, it's super complex and there's all these different rules. But when it comes down to it, most of this is R1 or RS with a number, or maybe RSP something. And that is all single family zoning. It is one house on one parcel of land that a person can purchase or maybe rent. And single family zoning makes it so that what you have to buy or rent to live in Marin is a lot more expensive. And like that's like most extreme here in Mill Valley, where you have RS20, which makes it so that here on the left, single family minimum lot size is 20,000 square feet. So you have to be able to buy 20,000 square feet of land to live in that area of Mill Valley. And single family zoning, just a quick few things about it. It was designed originally, it was first conceived in Berkeley, intentionally to exclude lower income residents and people of color from Marin. So single family, they were trying to figure out like how they can keep their community white and wealthy in 1917 in Berkeley. And at the time it was illegal to do it explicitly by race, saying like only white people can live in this neighborhood. So they decided to make it so that the homes would have to be super expensive. And they were effective in that, in keeping their community white and wealthy in Berkeley in 1917. And that legacy of single family zoning has really lasted till today. And the areas in Marin are nearly 20%, areas in general, excuse me, not just Marin, are 20% whiter that have high single family zoning than low single family zoning. And that was categories made by this group in Berkeley. And then single family zoning also geographically hoards resources. And what I mean by geographically hoards resources is, for example, in like school or free reduced price lunches. So like kids in school, some pay for their lunch fully, and some people get it subsidized by like the local or state government, wherever the funding comes from, if they can't pay for it. So it's kind of a measurement of wealth. And in your low single family zone cities, like over about 52% of kids get free or reduced price lunches, where in your high single family zone cities, 26% people of kids get those lunches. So a lot less people in the high single family zoning. And I think that shows, like, if you have a school district in Marin with lots of more wealthy people, you're going to consolidate all of the wealthy resources in that school district. Where if you have a school district with more affordable housing, which there's some of in Marin and a lot more of outside of Marin, that puts a lot of the resource burden on those communities rather than just in Marin to subsidize lunch or do lots of other things. And there's these really cool maps of the single family zoning in Marin by the different cities in Marin. So starting with Tiburon, the pink is single family zoning, and then the blue is other residential zoning, like multifamily housing usually, which is by design more affordable than single family homes. Tiburon, 89% single family zoned. Oh, we're back. Ross is 100% single family zone. So there is no more affordable multifamily housing in Ross. Novato, 90%. Mill Valley, 93% single family zoned. Larkspur has a lot more multifamily housing and has probably a lot more affordable housing options, but still 50% single family zone. Fairfax 97%, and it goes on. And I just want to go back to the map here that we saw earlier of like the geographic inequities in Marin County, and really connecting that to this hoarding of resources that we have in our county. We have systems in place to make it so that all of the 7.5 years longer residents that live in Ross live in one place, while people of color or more low-income people live in somewhere else in Marin. So housing is super difficult to build, and we've talked about those systems. But we've also blocked housing when it's been proposed in Marin. So like lots of proposed housing has happened, and lots of groups have worked in Marin to prevent that housing from being built. And they don't necessarily say in their like group name, I just got these from the websites, that they're like against affordable housing, or that they're against people of color, or they're not like explicitly racist in the name, but they focus on like small town quality of life, or Marin against density. They don't want any density, or livable California. They're for livable, whatever that means to them. But the effect of fighting against affordable housing in their community makes it so that Marin is less affordable, all those things that we talked about. Most recently, like Nevada is weighing a lawsuit to stop this project of supportive housing that hopefully Andrew would talk a bit more about. And there's a lot of organizations working in Marin to make our county more affordable through a lot of different ways. Like community land trusts focus on buying existing homes and taking them off the market, so they're in the hands of the community at a lower price. Lots of different groups focus on different ways to make Marin or the Bay Area more affordable. And I think that kind of follows the fact that Marin has this narrative of like, this is from Parks and Rec, like of angry people showing up at hearings and like getting mad at local government for ever proposing affordable housing to be in their community. And that has happened, and that's the narrative, and more different types of people, young people especially, I think should get involved to advocate for housing in their community and shift that narrative. So say we have like a coalition of young people, of people who want our county more affordable, more diverse, like what steps should be taken to actually make that happen. And people talk about the solutions for housing through the 3 Ps. So producing, preserving, and protecting housing in our county. So producing more homes, keeping the existing ones affordable, and protecting people who already live in homes from displacement or from prices rising too much, stuff like that. And I think these are all probably equally important. And I think that in Marin, focusing on building affordable homes or homes of all income in our exclusive communities is what like I'm focused on, and there's lots of other great work being done as well by some of those other organizations I showed. So building housing at all levels of affordability, and especially for folks who struggle to live here now, for our workforce and for unhoused residents in Marin, and especially in our exclusive wealthier communities to counteract that hoarding of resources dynamic that putting a lot of expensive homes in one area can do. And then also oriented around transit, because we have some transit in Marin and it's not great, but the only way that our transit can get better and we can have less cars on the road is by building more homes near that transit so that people can use it. So and then, okay, how do we do that? Like those are pretty lofty goals. And really 3 points here. first of all, making it less complicated to build housing in Marin in the Bay Area. You saw the zoning maps, and it's really hard to understand how housing is built here. And that's also true for the folks who build housing. There's a lot of complex regulations to navigate. And then also supporting homes when they are proposed. I think that's the thing that folks like y'all can help with, is showing up at a hearing and saying, I support affordable housing in my community. I think that's like a pretty radical thing for Marin, is to have people doing something like that. And then also balancing regional and local control. Like, this is a regional issue. It's an issue about Marin communities, but it's also about like tons of people having to go across the bridges, and about people from Vacaville also having jobs in Marin. So I think there's a good argument for balancing regional and local control. We like having control here in Marin, but if we're not able to solve these problems, maybe the region should step in and say, Marin, you have to build these homes. So that is what I got, and maybe take a couple questions if you all have questions, and then get to Andrew's presentation. I went a bit longer than I expected to, but would love to hear y'all's thoughts. Sweet. Well, if there's nothing, Andrew, do you want to hop on and I'm going to make it so that you can share your screen.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ethan. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining tonight. Yeah, Ethan, that was great. That was like a really good overview of kind of how we got here. And obviously one of the consequences of that is more homelessness, unfortunately, for our state and our region. Can you see my screen here?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I'll run through this somewhat quickly, and then definitely want to leave time for questions if you have them. I'll start with just sort of a somewhat shocking statistic that I like to start with, which is that with housing being, one of the various reasons that people become homeless, the cost of housing, if you can believe it, in 2017, Marin County had the 7th highest per capita rate of homelessness in the entire country. So that's the result of this kind of NIMBYism and lag in housing production and all the things that Ethan talked about. So fortunately, though, we've actually been having some success on the homelessness front since 2017. And that work really began a couple years earlier than that. And so I'll give you just a quick update of kind of what our strategy is. So going back to 2015, what we realized is that at that time, there was a lot of community pressure and concern about homelessness. And what we realized is that the vast majority of people that were experiencing homelessness in Marin, and this is the case all across the country, for the vast majority of people, they really do not cause any community issues. There really is this smaller group that generates a lot of our concerns. And that group is called the chronically homeless. And chronic homelessness is just long-term homelessness that's often exacerbated by like a mental health issue or a health issue, or substance abuse, developmental challenges. So kind of a little bit more health related. If you were to plot people that are temporarily homeless to people that are chronically homeless, per capita, the average chronic homeless person costs $60,000 per year in public services. That's here in Marin as well as in other places. Again, like I said, in terms of community complaints, in San Rafael, we found that about 70% of people that are homeless on the street generate 0 911 police EMS interaction. Again, it's just a small number that generate the vast majority of those concerns. And then I think, again, just ethically, and like I said, the vulnerability, studies have found that people that are chronically homeless pass away on average 25 years earlier than their housed peers from preventable, treatable chronic illnesses that just go untreated on the street. So in Marin, and I think, again, this is the case in a lot of parts of the country, the historic focus is really on this more like temporary episodic part of the curve. And the reality is, again, that, our real issue is chronic homelessness. And historically in Marin, we were not addressing this group. So this was back in like 2015, 16, when we identified chronic homelessness as our major concern. We started going all across the region to better understand what other communities are doing to address chronic homelessness. We went up to Sonoma. We looked at different supportive housing programs. And we also started mapping our own local system of care. And so if you were to imagine homelessness is the center of this circle, being housed is the outside, the details are less important than basically, I think what's obvious is that we had created this maze of different housing and services and interventions to actually get to housing. And so the result was that you have people that are inherently difficult to serve because of those issues I talked about earlier. And then we created these programs that people kept failing out of. They'd fail out of them, but they become distrustful, they wouldn't seek help, and they'd get worse. And this cycle had been repeating itself to the point that there were people, and even today, if you can believe it, we just housed someone who has been homeless in Marin County since 1989 because of the way that our system had been set up. It was not designed to support this person. So what we realized is that we didn't need just like another mental health program or another substance abuse program. We needed to recognize the unique needs of individual people. And so we started this this program that we learned about in San Mateo called the Homeless Outreach Team, where basically we got all of our different service providers around the same table. We started working off of a by name list of literally like starting with a dozen people of the most vulnerable people in the community and saying, look, if we can't get these people housed with all of the county and the service providers in the city, you know, what the hell are we doing? Like really, like why are we in this field if we can't get these people housed? And so we started working slowly but surely to get people housed. And over those first 18 months, this started in March of 2016, we housed 23 of the most vulnerable people in Marin County. And basically it was this process of skipping past all of the kind of homelessness management and getting them straight into housing. And this process is called Housing First, which I'm happy to talk more about. But like I said, it started working. We were getting people housed who it seemed like there was never going to be any chance of them getting housed again. And so in 2017, like I said, that was when Marin had this extremely high per capita rate of homelessness. That's when we made this by name list approach our county-wide strategy. And we learned at the same time as we were doing this that there's actually a national movement called Built for Zero that's in over 80 communities across the US and Canada, where communities are working on this by name list approach to end chronic and veteran homelessness. And so we joined this movement. We're part of it now. And fast forward 2 years to 2019, we had seen a 28% reduction in chronic homelessness. And this was almost a 1-for-1 match, this reduction, with our increase in permanent supportive housing. And so for people that we did house, over 90% of those people are still housed. We've seen a close to 90% reduction in police calls for service and over 50% reduction in EMS transports for people that have been housed. And so that really is the system that's working. And I should say that over this same time period, all across the Bay Area, other communities saw double-digit increases, in some cases 30, 40% increases in homelessness. And so obviously something that we're doing is working, and those other communities are not doing that. So in 2020, obviously COVID's a huge issue. And just a couple of things just real quick to let you know. At the height of COVID, we increased homeless emergency shelter by about 60%. The county had passed an eviction moratorium to prevent evictions for people that were affected by COVID. We provided emergency rental assistance to about 1,000 households in Marin. And it looks like there's gonna be another funding commitment to more emergency support. And I think the important thing too is that we didn't lose focus on chronic homelessness. And so back in August, we actually had our best housing placement month to date. We housed over 20 chronically homeless people. And that was in part because of this facility that you can see right here, which is called Victory Village. It was a senior housing facility in Fairfax, and we were able to carve out some of those units for our chronic homeless population. In San Rafael, we also recently approved basically, if you've heard of Homeward Bound or Mill Street, we're planning to knock down the existing Mill Street shelter and then rebuild the shelter. So basically knock this down, create ground floor parking, and then start building up, add a floor of shelter, and then add 2 more floors of housing. So that would be another 30 units of permanent supportive housing. And then Ethan mentioned that recently, because of COVID, the state has put out this kind of unheard of request for housing acquisition efforts called Project Homekey. And so I should mention here too that I'm here tonight on behalf of Opening Doors Marin. And so Opening Doors Marin is basically a public-private partnership that we created over the past few years to really work to create the housing that we need to meet our goal of ending chronic and veteran homelessness in Marin. So through Opening Doors in partnership with the county and Homeward Bound, we're now looking at 3 motel sites and a commercial site to acquire them, honestly, within like a week or 2 from now, if the Board of Supervisors approves this, and bringing those units into the fold to become more permanent supportive housing. So the first site is in Marin here in Corte Madera. That would be 19 units. The next is 3301 Kerner. That's a commercial site in San Rafael that would be converted to housing. And then the last is in Marin, which is in Novato. And so tomorrow in Marin, or sorry, not in Marin, the other 2, America's Best Value and 3301 Kerner are going to the Board of Supervisors tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. For final consideration for purchase. And then next Tuesday in Marin is going to the Board of Supervisors for consideration of final purchase. And I'll just say our goal as a community through Opening Doors is to end chronic and veteran homelessness in Marin. And I think we could actually be, if we did that, the first community in the Bay Area, county in the Bay Area to do that. And without projects like these, I mean, we can still hopefully do it, but it's a lot harder. And so I'll end there. I will say the final piece, and I think it really dovetails with Ethan's presentation, which was really about making this about equity, which it is about. Black Marinites are 400% more likely to experience homelessness. Again, for a lot of the reasons that Ethan talked about around historic housing discrimination, wealth disparity that results from that. And so what's interesting that I'm observing is that in San Rafael, that project 3301 Kerner is on the south side of the canal. It's near services, which makes it a great site, but there hasn't been a lot of pushback to that location. There is a lot of pushback to the other 2. And those are in areas where the neighbors are basically, you know, I almost still have like PTSD from some of these community meetings we've had where people have basically accused the homeless community of being rapists and sex offenders and like, I mean, every horrible thing that you can imagine. And frankly, these are all, you know, dog whistles around racism or socioeconomic discrimination towards people. And the data, like I shared, is that, you know, people might have a perception of what someone is when they're homeless on the street, but when people are housed, they're housed and they do extremely well. And there isn't this crime wave. There isn't this drop in property values. All of that is just total NIMBY BS. So, you know, I get where people are scared and this has been moving fast. And so we want to be respectful of that and bring people into the fold, but it's just not true. And so I really hope through this event and your energy and efforts that we can make sure that these projects are approved. So I'll stop there, see if there are any questions or comments.
I think someone had a question in the chat about, I don't know much about this, but the bathrooms and sinks in Novato. And do you see that, Andrew?
I do, yeah. Let's see. Yeah, so I'm aware of the Richardson's Bay situation. And just in terms of like the Opening Doors front, I think the county is more like specifically involved with like the unsheltered response right now. I think what's happening in Novato is that, I mean, so I guess to take a step back. So at the start of COVID, the CDC put out guidance to communities to basically say, do not clear any homeless encampments as long as shelter in place is in place, with the feeling that if you were to clear a homeless encampment, that could lead to virus transmission by people spreading out into the community. The reality, I mean, just to be honest, from working in this field for over a decade, is that people are already leaving encampments during the day. You know, they're humans. They're going out to see people. They're going to the store. They're doing what they need to do to survive. But that being said, so that is the policy. So so I think in Novato right now, there's just a lot of controversy because there are people that were staying at the Novato library, and there's just been a lot of kind of, what's going on with the people that are staying there. Richardson's Bay is another interesting one because so technically, the technical definition of homeless basically means that you don't have, you're either literally homeless on the street, or you're staying in a place that doesn't have water and power and the basic amenities of living in a home. And so there are about 130 or so vessels on Richardson's Bay, about 100 of which are occupied, who meet the criteria for being homeless. So about almost 10% of the people that are homeless in Marin are homeless on boats on Richardson's Bay. And so what's interesting is that there's been a long-standing norm around people being out there. And what's interesting is within even that subpopulation, there are people who are experienced mariners who, know how to sail, know how to maintain a boat. And then there are people who are literally like homeless on land, find out about a boat, buy it for $100, and then they're out on the water and they have no idea what they're doing. There's no motor, there's no sail, and if there's a storm, which there's going to be for sure storms coming up in the winter, those boats sink, people drown. I mean, it's like a real health and safety issue. So basically I think there's some concern right now of Richardson's Bay Regional Agency is trying to, create a safer environment out there, but that could potentially lead to displacement of people who don't have, somewhere to go if they were to lose their vessel. And so there are efforts to try to house people, provide them shelter. But it's difficult because that community is very service resistant. But anyway, hopefully that's enough of an overview, but.
Yeah, that's helpful. I asked the question in the chat. I saw, didn't some woman's like house or like houseboat get like literally destroyed? And I'm just wondering like how,
Yep.
I don't know, I guess, yeah, just wondering about that and how
That doesn't seem to create a safer environment.
Yeah, it's a good question. Part of the challenge out there is that people have multiple boats. So I know that there was a boat that like was covered by the IJ of this woman's boat was crushed. And so there are some people that have multiple vessels. And so one vessel might get, at least when this started, there might be an enforcement effort against it. But I think there's also been a little bit of misinformation about the extent to which like boats are being actively destroyed out there that are occupied. There has been a movement to try to reduce the number of unoccupied vessels out there. That's the initial enforcement strategy on the water. But I think to just be like really honest about this, because I know that there is a lot of advocacy going on about people in the water, is that I definitely see Eric's comment here about, is it safer to destroy their homes? I think what's happening is that there literally are some boats and some people, like there's a person out there, without going into personal details about them, who's blind. So this is a gentleman who is blind, living on the water, cannot go to shore. He is relying on other people in the anchorage to provide supplies for him. But when they go out and come back, he's, they've taken more money than they were supposed to take. I mean, so there are people that are actively being exploited out there. And so we're trying to find a safe way so that their boats are not destroyed and then they're homeless. It's more like provide a housing opportunity for them. And then once they move off the water, take that boat off the water so that it's not occupied by someone else. That's I think the current strategy out there. So, but it's hard, I get it. I totally get the concern.
Yeah, definitely appreciate people's questions, and Andrew, you're responding. I think that we could definitely continue this conversation, but for some folks who have to hop off at 5, I just want to kind of quickly run through like what we're asking you to do if you're willing to, and then Andrew, if you have time and if people have more time to stay on, we can continue this after. So really like housing decisions, like they happen in like intense like one-day hearings, and the people from the public organize a lot on both sides if they're like for or against, and then on one day like they all like speak their opinion at a board of supervisors or city council or planning commission, and that like puts a lot of pressure on politicians who don't want to get voted out. If there's like a lot of people saying no to a housing project, then maybe the politician, even if they believe in that it'd be good for the community, is going to change their mind, because that's like how politics work. So like our goal then is to get a lot of people at this hearing, if this is something that you believe in, to speak in support of housing, to put pressure on the politicians who make these decisions to say yes, because like Judy Arnold has already decided that she doesn't think that the project in Novato would be good for Novato, and I think there's a lot of people who do think that, and we want to mobilize and get them out there. So I think that I'll go really briefly over like just giving a public comment. I think that it comes down to telling your story and then making a super hard ask, saying like, I want you to do this, as someone who lives in Marin, or as someone who lives in Corte Madera, if you live in Corte Madera. And I think that you can kind of talk about, not to make it too complex, but talk about like this obstacle or hardship, this challenge in your community, like homelessness, or say you have a personal experience or a friend has an experience. That's this challenge that you can talk about, that kind of creates this weight with this issue. And then you choose to be here. That's why I believe that we should have supportive housing in Corte Madera and Novato. And skipping over outcome, like this is why you're here at the meeting. You can connect the choice to this housing project. Like I believe that homelessness is an issue in Marin, and that this project is a good step to address that in Marin. Or I believe that we should have housing for low-income residents. And then at the end of your like personal story, of your public comment, you can make a hard ask. So like, please support this housing in Novato or in Corte Madera, or whichever one you are speaking for. And that doesn't go just for these projects, but for like housing and like lots of like hearings that y'all might speak at. And just on like having a hard ask, like I think a lot of people give pretty good public comments, and then like you know what they're for, but then they don't really like close the case, and they don't say like, please, we want these homes, or people can kind of fluster at the end. And a soft ask is something like, hey Andrew, like are you free this weekend, or like do you want to hang out sometime? Where a hard ask is like, are you free at 5 to hang out, which I think is like a big difference, and I think makes a big difference in the ways that people give comments and speak to politicians and whatnot. It's a lot easier to address something that's vague than like a specific thing that you are asking someone. So just some logistics for getting involved with this. You can speak at public comment at these hearings tomorrow for Corte Madera and San Rafael, and next week for Novato. And they're at 10. So if you're like in school or working, it might be difficult, but if you can come on, that would be awesome. Or you can write the Board of Supervisors to submit your public comment at that email. And I'm gonna send everyone an email right after we sign off with like all these logistics, so you can like click on things and do it yourself. So that's tomorrow at 10 for San Rafael and Corte Madera, and then next Tuesday at 10 for Novato. So if there's like a particular, if you live in Novato, I would recommend going to the Novato hearing, and the one tomorrow if you want. And then also, just to plug my own stuff, next Tuesday at 5, there's an event that I'm putting on with Housing Crisis Action, which is another group in Marin, more about affordability in Marin. So thinking about affordable housing as this broad term that people say, and like I couldn't get into it as much today. And it'll be a panel with like people who are working to make Marin more affordable, like developers, like builders, people who work with land trusts. So really looking forward to that at 5 next Tuesday. And then definitely like spread the word. about these hearings, about housing in general. I think it's like can be pretty interesting to talk with my parents who own a home in Marin about this stuff. Generates good conversations. And then like I'll be sure to reach out when there's like opportunities to advocate for housing. It's kind of weird because there's all these hearings that pop up like around times of the year. So you have to be vigilant and like ready to hop on a hearing if you want to advocate for housing in Marin. But feel free to reach out if you have any questions. All y'all should have my email.